And it's crazy. You and I grew up in the state when all three of them were good at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard for people of our age to watch these three programs at different points falter and not be able to get back up. Like, because we saw it at a time when it felt like they couldn't fail.
Yes. It was never going to fall apart, Andy. I mean, it was when both programs, or all three programs rather, were in the top 10. I mean, I don't know what the streak was.
Yeah.
But there was at least a 10-year window there where it felt like all three of them had a chance to win the national championship. I mean, Florida was the place to be. That was the states where all the NFL guys were coming out of, all the first-round picks.
And they still are. They're just very much more diverse in where they're going to college.
They're just dressed in maroon and red and
scarlet and gray,
right.
red and black.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where the key is going to be. It's what Ari and I talk about on Stars Matter all the time. There's no excuse for the Floridas, Miamis, and Florida States to not be in the top 10 every year if they're doing their job right.
Yeah. Now, the question is, how do you become cool again? Because that was one of the things that we discussed when you talked to some recruits about Florida, and I know you talked to them about Miami and Florida State too. Like, Florida's not cool right now. Mm-hmm. Miami's not cool right now. How do you get cool?
Well, NIL helps, right? I mean, that's certainly, I think the fact that they've got their act together now, it feels like, for Miami, it was John Ruiz. He was the one guy who was raising money for Florida. We know what they went through.
Yes.
Now you've kind of got more of a unified approach for both of those collectives, which helps them get into the game through the transfer portal and in recruiting. They really weren't involved in that. But now it translates to the field. What can Mario and Billy Napier do on the field to make their brand of football exciting? And that's the challenge.
I saw a recruit. I don't remember who it was. A 5-star kid in Florida. Mm-hmm. I saw a quote box on On3 or one of the recruiting services Twitters this week that said the quote from the 5-star, and I can't recall who the 5-star was. I'm sorry, but said that the biggest threat to Florida is Miami. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah. Okay, I'm sure that's true, but
it's to Georgia. I think it was you're talking about Jalen Hayward. I think he was a defensive back going to Georgia.
What did I say? I said that
you said the biggest threat to Florida is Miami.
No, the biggest threat to Georgia. Yeah, sorry. Yes. Thank you for catching that. And I was like, yeah, okay, but the key to cool is getting that person and all of his friends to not only say that in interviews to be nice, but to actually buy that and bet on it by going to Miami. Which that's the
which is how Kirby got Georgia where it is right now.
Yeah, and like Georgia is a juggernaut in terms of just like investment, and I think Miami's starting to now just catch up to that like financial investment piece to the whole thing. But it's like there is really no excuse for Miami to not have a top 10, top 5 talented roster in college football. The question is, what happened in South Florida where you live, where the kids who live there don't think it's cool to go there anymore? And like, is it like, because like my whole theory was the reason why your guys' state isn't all firing on all cylinders the way that it was when you were growing up is because Alabama has systematically ruined it.
Oh, they certainly started it with the one receiver a year, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy.
I think like 3 classes ago or 4 classes ago. You can go look this up, Mr. Numbers Guy.
Well, I was going to look up the name of the recruit.
They took Everett, I think is his first name.
No, he's the number 2 the number 1 cornerback in the country who's committed. For whatever reason, I'm forgetting his name right now.
They took, I think, 6 of the top 8 players out of the state of Florida in one cycle.
And now, IMG Academy screws that up a little bit.
No, but it was not IMG players. I looked at that. I took that into account. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, I mean, can one program legitimately kick the legs out from underneath 3 other places? Because if you do that in a 4-year period, you're taking 2 or 3 starters out of all 3 of those programs' lineups.
Yeah.
Alabama started it. I think Clemson and Georgia and Ohio State have continued
because Clemson with the Scott family,
right?
When Brad was working there, and then Jeff was obviously the receivers coach for a while, became the USF head coach, and now is back with Clemson, I think, as a consultant. But they were great in Southwest Florida. Sammy Watkins, that group. They were good in Tampa. And then Alabama was great in Dade and Broward, and Georgia has just been able to kind of pick and choose what they want.
Yeah.
You know what I think too is a fascinating discussion is it doesn't really, we're getting old, but Florida signed the greatest recruiting class ever in 2010, right? Was it 2010?
It was the highest ranked. Ronald Powell is still the highest ranked recruit Florida's ever signed. And he's one of the highest ranked recruits ever. That was the Ronald Powell, Dominic Easley, Sharif Floyd class. It was Urban's last class.
So my question really is, and I'm curious if there's an exception that comes to the top of your guys' heads, but the reason why that happened was because Urban Meyer was a dog, and the persona of your head coach is what makes you cool or not. My question is, like, if Mario Cristobal, isn't he supposed to have that same impact, right? And it seems like they had a really good class last year, but it wasn't elite. So does a coach like Lincoln Riley to a certain extent too is supposed to have that as an instant impact? Your presence as the coach is supposed to be the reason why your team signs a top 5 class with a bunch of top 100 players in it. Do these coaches need time to build into that, or should their personas have already amounted into that? Because like I'm trying to think like,
I think there's a harder hill to climb now, because we talked about this the other day, the clustering of recruits. They cluster more than ever now. They didn't cluster as much when Urban got to Florida or when Nick Saban got to Alabama. And Nick Saban, his first full cycle, so he gets there 07, 08's his first full cycle class, happened to be a bumper crop in the state of Alabama, and he cleaned it up. And so some of it is timing as well. But
it goes back to that same discussion we were having on the podcast when how do you say his name? Raiola? What's the right way?
Raiola. Dylan Raiola.
Yeah, I'm never going to pronounce it correctly ever again now.
By the way, Ari, I'm going to interrupt you for one second.
Go ahead.
It's Ellis Robinson who's the one who was
What
quoted
did I say,
saying
Everett? Yeah, Ellis Robinson.
Ellis
yes.
Robinson, yeah.
And I was discussing like what it takes to become cool and what it'll be for like a Nebraska type player or program to get a player like that. And it's like, what coach could go to a place like Miami and in year one just light the world on fire? Like if Nick Saban in a mythical world went to Miami,
Nick Saban could do that. Kirby Smart could do that.
Okay, so is that the only two?
I don't know that Urban Meyer could do that anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if he could either. But like, even current
Deion's
coaches,
the only other one.
But I'm just trying to like think to myself like, well, you're talking about that cluster.
Lincoln Riley maybe, but
he didn't even do it at USC.
He didn't do USC. You're right.
Like,
you're right.
If you can't do it at USC, and maybe they will this year, I don't know.
Well, yeah, USC and Miami, same type of job in terms of access and glamour and all that. So
I almost feel like USC and Texas are like Spider-Man emoji, right?
Very much so.
And I don't know if you would put Miami in the...
No, because Miami doesn't have the resources that those two have.
Yeah, but now...
Maybe they do now.
Yeah, and well, the thing about Miami, and maybe Manny, you can help me out with this, is I saw that the Life Wallet company,
Yes.
like the stock is like plummeted 95%.
That's a whole podcast.
Yeah,
That's a whole.
I know, but it's like, you think about, well, what's cool, it's, NIL's cool. It's like, well, so is stocks that don't go down 95% in a year. So,
Now, Ruiz is not the only NIL presence at Miami anymore.
Yeah.
It's there's a little more diversified. And then Florida, as much as we wrote about the Jaden Rashada situation, they have now modernized the NIL, which is weird to say modernized, something is 2 years old, but they have structured it properly now. It's run like a fundraising arm now.
Well, Andy, and I would say we can't forget either, the Florida law just changed, right, in February, where I think all these other states had sort of a head start on Florida because the law basically banned the colleges from being able to interact with
right. And now they
collectives,
can.
and now they can.
And part of the Jaden Rashada mess was not being able to have any sort of oversight from the school, because if there had been, no one would have allowed that contract to be written.